President Trump, you promised if you were elected, you would no longer ignore the American people. Sir, I have been ignored for 5 years. My name is James Mosley. I have a story that has been hidden by the government, and it is imperative that you learn of what happened to me. 5 years ago in a Mobile, Alabama hospital that is unbelievable and would be, except I have absolute, undisputed, documented proof that has been ignored by the Mobile Police Department, the mayor, the district attorney, and far beyond that. If you'll bear with me for a moment as I scroll some of my evidence while I speak and tell you a very brief account of what happened to me. Sir, I was admitted to Ochsner Hospital in February 2012 in New Orleans to undergo a bilateral lung transplant due to a genetic lung disease. I was a retired high school teacher and coach, and at 51 years old, I had to retire early from a job that I loved dearly. But at 61 years old, I was forced to make a decision. And fortunately for me, I received the lungs of a young black man. And I'm so proud to be breathing through those lungs. And I'm so proud and thankful for that family of giving my opportunity to live a little longer. 4 months I was in the hospital, twice as long as the average patient. When I returned home, I was far from being out of the woods. Within the first week, I had returned to Ochsner twice in an emergency situation. Just before I left Ochsner, I was having difficulty sleeping, and I was suffering anxiety because I was on 32 different drugs. And my transplant doctor brought in a psychiatrist there with Ochsner, a Dr. Knight, and he treated me for anxiety, which helped with my sleep, which was imperative in my recovery. But home, reality hit. I developed a fungal infection that was life-threatening. I returned to the hospital. They put me on a new drug that was very powerful, and it had a side effect which exacerbated my anxiety to the point where my hands would shake, and it interfered with my sleep. Well, my brother took away my car keys. After I returned home, I was able to drive up to 5 to 10 miles, 5 miles pretty much, because my hospital was only a few miles away, Providence Hospital. Well, one morning I got ready to drive to Providence, only a 4-mile drive away, to take some blood work. And my brother intervened and took my car keys. It upset me. I felt like I could drive myself. He was right, I was wrong. But as it turned out, I refused to allow him to drive. He called my psychiatrist at Ochsner, and Dr. Knight said, well, we're going to bring him to Ochsner and admit him. You call the emergency and have the ambulance company call me, which occurred. And they literally came and got me and took me back toward Ochsner, the ambulance service. However, a rogue medic, a racist medic, nearly killed me during route. He cut off all my clothes. I was hit in the chest. My arms were covered in blood. He nearly killed me. And instead of taking me to Ochsner, they turned back to Mobile and took me to Mobile Infirmary, a hospital in the inner city that I never used. I've never been treated. But it's my hospital for my brother. But Providence is only 4 miles from my house. But they took me to this inner city hospital because a black head of emergency, Dr. Herbert Stone, admitted me, forged my signature, and injected me with so much medication that I slept for 18 hours before I awoke to find a urine-soaked towel on my face. And I looked down at my feet and I found my bloody, cut to pieces shirt at my feet. My family was denied access. They were told that night that I became irate in my trip back to Ochsner, and they took me to Mobile Infirmary instead. And they told my family, do not disturb me, that I would be transferred to Ochsner just as soon as I could. That was a lie. I was held 4 days. I was denied my medications. I was denied the one thing that was keeping me alive, my anti-rejection medications. For 4 days, I begged for food. I begged for care. All they did was dry wrap my arms with gauze. I was dying in a room. On day 4, a lady comes in, introduces herself as Dolores Bray. She was a therapist out of the hospital. She came in to check and see just how close I was to death. I know that now. I didn't know it then. She rushed out of the room in less than 5 minutes. And within a few hours, I was transferred to Ochsner. I went to Ochsner covered. My arms were wrapped. When they took the gauze off, blood just dripped all over the floor. I begged for care. I begged for treatment. I begged for therapy. I stayed at Ochsner several days. And even though they couldn't explain all of my injuries, the bruises that was on my chest, the bruises on my legs where they slammed injections into my legs, they refused to investigate it. I begged them, please. When I returned home, I went to the police department. I filed charges against the unknown medic and charges against the emergency room doctor who I never spoke to. But he stood over me in the emergency room and just shook his head and walked away. And I was told my charges would be investigated. Months passed and there was no investigation. I contacted the district attorney. I've sent emails, I made phone calls. Finally, just to get rid of me, she called me and said, tell me who you talked to in the investigation. I'll investigate it. And she sent me an email back saying after viewing my evidence, there's no evidence of a crime. I knew that was a lie. I tried for months to meet with the mayor, and I was refused. And instead, one morning, the investigator called me and told me to stop trying to meet with the mayor. I knew I was in trouble. Sir, to make a long story short, I acted as pro se because I was refused my medical records for over 2 years. And of course, the courts dismissed my case due to the statute of limitations. The courts, I learned, were corrupt. I was forced to even file an appeal to the state Supreme Court. I filed 47 pages. I worked diligently for a month. It was affirmed, and I know for a fact that it was ordered covered up because of Medicare. Records that were denied to me over 2 years, I finally learned during those court sessions because I finally was able to talk to a Caucasian, the only one that would talk to me at Medicare. He refused his name because he knew his life or his job at least was in jeopardy if he helped me. Well, he mailed me documents to prove Medicare paid the hospital thousands of dollars in absolute fraud. They paid a doctor, Dr. Stone, for extra EKGs and treatments that I never received. Finally, with those records, Mobile Infirmary was forced to come up with something, even though there was no records for the 4 days. They, they took the records. The hospital found a patient admitted a few hours after me. She was suicidal. She had heart failure. And they took those records and counterfeited them to try to make it look like my records. So obviously fraudulent. And the charges, a doctor shows that he was paid nearly $1,900 for being my attending physician. Well, sir, I have documents, his affidavit, stating that he never met me, never provided me care, and was never paid for my care. The hospital took that doctor's records of another patient and used them as mine. All of my efforts with the Office of Civil Rights, HHS, DHR, the DOJ, you name it, the FBI. That's one that really gets me because I did go down and I met with an FBI agent, showed him my records, 2-hour meeting. I was told, Mr. Mosley, you have a very strong case. You'll hear from us soon. A few days later, I heard from him. Another agent that refused his name told me, Mr. Mosley, you don't have any evidence. Your case is closed and don't contact us again. Sir, I was the victim of a racial hate crime that was ordered covered up during the Obama administration. You promised that I would no longer be ignored. Well, sir, I have been trying since you have been in office to get you to look and listen at my evidence. What you're going to see on this little video is a tip of the iceberg. It is so beyond comprehension what I have had to endure. Sir, I pray you stand up for me and stand up for America and do not ignore me as you promised, as you gave your word. God bless you.